Sami, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Oh, wow. That's kind of funny because I've been presenting for I've been presenting for like 22 years, but I mean on US and big stages for about 10 years. Next year will be 10 years since I joined Tech Ed for the first time nowadays, Ignite. And the weirdest thing here is that I never ever used, I guess never except in a panel, used a boom mic. So this feels more like stand-up than this feels like an IT presentation. But so whenever I throw this out and start, and you can't hear me, just wait a second and I'll remember that I need to use this. So the session is called Implementing Privileged Access Workstations, short introduction. Anyway, my name is Sami Laiho, I'm from Finland. I've been teaching Windows internals and security for 23 years, working in IT for about 26 years. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the core operating system. I am here in a security conference because I used to hate security conferences. I started doing security sessions only because of two reasons. First of all, every security session I went to, wherever it was, every security session was like, I hack you like this, 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 then I hack you like this, and then everyone walks out of the room like, oh, my company sucks. So I didn't like it at all. And the other one was that all presentations usually were against the improper configuration of the operating system. Of course, the biggest fault being that you show demos where someone's an admin. And 1993 book, Windows NT 3.1 user guide has a statement that says, in Windows, there is no security if you log on as an admin. Also, that same, not that same, but the first Windows internals book also had a note that says that the security subsystem cannot withstand the use of admin rights. Still, most of the demos in all of the security sessions are like Mimikatz this, Mimikatz that. Well, it's just, I'm very impressed whenever you have a privilege elevation attack where you can actually elevate from a limited user. That's the only thing that really impresses me, because otherwise you're anyway fighting against the biggest rule in the book. So that's why I started this. I haven't done security sessions for, actually now, oh my God, I'm getting old. 7 years already. Okay, fair enough. It's been a while. Anyway, something big changed this year. I've been 12 years self-employed, so I actually joined TrueSec this year. I'm now the Chief Research Officer for TrueSec, and it's weird. It's painful. I've been working solo for 12 years, and it's hard to probably kind of think about it or believe it while I'm standing here or at Ignite in front of 3,500 people, but I'm actually really introvert and I do not like socializing. So now I have 250 colleagues. They're really annoying, you know? They're sending me like Teams messages, email. My CEO insists that calling is a good idea. And he honestly just sent me a message. Do you have 2 minutes on the phone? Yes, today between 7 and 9. Maybe. I just hate it. I was laughing at this because my oldest son I was at my summer house alone with the dog, and then my oldest son sent me and he didn't send me, he calls me and says, Daddy, the neighbor's dog, the golden retriever, it's just outside now with the lady. And I instantly replied, thanks for notifying me so I won't go. And he calls me back like, no, that means you have to go out because there's company. I was no, sorry, okay, I'm sorry. Just thought you were warning me that there's people there. So, anyway, I'm not going to do a speech on TrueSec, but we do a lot of security operations center, and we're not playing around as a SOC. We only specialize in preventing cybercrime for companies. So that's it. I am so happy I chose these really bright white slides, because that's just like this. That's blinding. I like teaching concepts. I don't like teaching small techie stuff. We can always solve the small techie stuff if you deploy concepts. What is the biggest problem of privileged access workstation projects failing? Biggest problem is that people read Microsoft's instructions. They're just really bad. Because they're built by a company that builds the same instructions for small companies in Europe and military in US. So they have to be built by the tightest possible environment. So what happened to me was, for example, I went to Ignite and I had a session about privileged access workstations, and Microsoft had one as well, and they asked the audience, everyone raised their hand who needs 2 computers to take care of your management. Almost everyone in the room raised their hands. Okay, keep them up if you need 3. And then he kept going, and there were still like 4 people with their hands up at 7. I met them after the session and they were like, you know, we really love Ultrabooks. I was like, yeah, I can bet that. 7 laptops in a backpack. You really love Ultrabooks. Anyway, so honestly, that's why PAW fails. PAW fails because people read those instructions that are built for military use. People who shoot missiles. Well, to be fair, I'm from Finland, so I'm really happy to say that, of course, we would hope that everyone who shoots missiles uses a great operating system built by Finnish people. So, and not Microsoft. But anyway, if someone happens to use Microsoft in a military environment, I kind of get it that your PAW is very difficult and you have to sacrifice usability. Last week, Swiss customer calls in. Hi, Sami, can you help us with the PAW? We want to make sure that it's secure. So what do you have? Well, here's my computer. I have a Hyper-V running on it, and I have 7 different virtual machines for 7 different tiers. I can keep you as secure and make your life a hell of a lot easier. Don't read those instructions literally. They're bad. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and they hate me saying this, but as long as I'm doing good at the conferences, they can't kick me out. Simplify things heavily. Who knows a Finnish guy called Mikko Hyppönen? Anyone? One. Great. And I was just about to say he's the most famous Finn. That really backfired. Mikko wrote a book about security. Now that McAfee sadly passed away, he's the oldest person alive who ever built an antivirus solution. So he's the chief research officer for F-Secure. And Mikko wrote a book. I think he won like a best name for a book competition. After long times of thinking, he decided that his new book is now called Internet. And if you can find that Internet book, it's a really good book, and he explains things, and I think I was really proud because I found out that he agrees with me a lot. So I was actually really happy. It made me feel good that I wasn't doing things that other people wouldn't appreciate. And one of the common things he said, he goes to a company and he wants a tour, he wants to see how the facilities are, goes around and goes to the financial department. Today in Finland, if you think about how much money gets out of the country by cyber incidents, the biggest one is still CEO scams. That's the biggest amount of money that gets out. They get especially during summer, they get an invoice and they pay it to the wrong bank account. Okay, someone lures them into thinking that they're the CEO who's asking them to quickly pay this. So Mikko goes to the finance department and asks the person there, so which computer do you use to pay those €1 million invoices? And they're really proud when Mikko comes in, so they're like, this is my computer here. This one I use. Okay? So what computer do you use to go to Facebook? The same computer? That's where a PAW should be in place. PAW is not just about controlling your Active Directory or Azure Active Directory or Google services. It's about everything. I mean, you should consider the whole concept and simplify it heavily, which is why we say that if you can use a device to take down the company, you should not be able to Facebook on it. People are lazy, super lazy, which means that what I see a lot is they install the PAW like I tell them, and now the PAW is here. I'm doing something else with them, and then I'm asking them like, hey, we need to enable a group policy. We need your PAW. Okay, just give me a sec, and I'll take my phone. And they take their phone, and I'm like, what are you doing? Using TeamViewer to remote into the PAW. I was like, dude, it's exactly what we're trying to prevent you from doing. But that's the human mind. We're trying to make things easy. I get this question every week. We just installed a Citrix machine so that anyone can use a Chromebook to manage the environment from their summer house. Great. Awesome. I mean, the easier you make your life, the easier you make the attacker's life as well. And that's something that people should always keep in mind. Now, without the tier model, the PAW doesn't make any sense. So a quick run through of what we do on every environment that we manage, or in my case, every environment that I get to architect. So the first thing is tiering Active Directory. We'll get to Azure AD after this, and you can use the same principles for anything, okay? So first of all, we split the directories into 3 different tiers. We got the power tier, which is your domain controllers, usually PKI, maybe identity management, stuff like that. Then you have your servers, and then you have your endpoints. What we want to make sure is that you cannot use the most critical accounts to log on to a container that has malware potentially. So a compromised endpoint, for example. So your most and absolutely most important thing is this. Domain admins need to be prevented from logging on to anything but DCs, okay? They cannot log on anywhere else. Year 21, I was working with 21 companies. So 21 different companies that were breached. Just to keep my reputation up, I'll note that I only was working with them after breach, okay? So anyway, 21 and 19 of those 21 customers, 19 of those 21 breaches would have been prevented if this was in place. If you look at any audit report or any red team report on how they gained access to the company, how they compromised, it always says domain admin at some point there. Okay, that's the crown jewel of anyone who's attacking an environment. So make sure those cannot be used in the locations where malware potentially exists. And I know so many of you are taking pictures, and as I'm quite sure you don't want to take pictures of me, but the content, I'll tell you, it's not ready yet. Okay, there's more animations to it. Okay, I can let you know. Same goes for server admins. Server admins can only log on to servers, nowhere else. Workstation admins can only log on to workstations, nowhere else. Am I the most hated person in the company? Yes, I am. That's for sure. I've actually, this is really cool. I love this, but I actually get paid to be a scapegoat. This started happening a few years ago when my name was a little bit better known on this. I've been working with getting rid of admin rights for companies for 20 years now. Is this still a problem? This year I've already taken away more than 1 million end users' admin rights. And I have to put out tweets that say admin rights are not human rights. Because honestly, people still think they are. I have a Finnish company. Well, Microsoft is the most hypocritical company ever. They have more than 140,000 local admins. Think about that. That's easy to secure. Anyway, if the scapegoat thing, I was actually paid by a company to go on stage like this with 400 of their employees. They had already taken away admin rights. They have done everything. The only thing I was paid for was to stand up here and say that it was my idea. And they paid me a lot. Because it's easier to hate an external consultant than having every employee hate the IT department. I'll just take the money and I'll go away. I don't mind. I was telling them why they can't have admin rights. Think about this. One guy stands up in the middle of the session. He stands up and starts yelling at me. Mister, you make this sound like we're not supposed to do anything with our computers but work. Wow. Took a while for that to sink in, but but that's the thing. People think that we as companies give them computers and they can play whatever they want. Had a pharmaceutical company last week, did an app locker project with them. After a month of monitoring line of business applications, top 5. Inside of top 5, we had 3D pony simulator, Movie Star Planet, and Roblox. There were 2 line of business apps as well, but think about it. Those 3 are in top 5 pharmaceutical companies. So no wonder people are upset that their work computers should only be used for work. It's horrible. I'm really sorry. Think about this. This pisses off not just the end users, this pisses off the admins. Because you used to have one account that can do anything you want, and now you have usually at least 5. One for reading email, one for managing your own computer, one for workstation management, one for server management, one for domain management. 5 different tokens, 5 different MFAs potentially. I mean, I know. It's painful. But it's exactly the same thing as what happened with net banking. When I started with net banking, you could get on some of the net, especially in the US, you could get into a net bank with just a username and password. No one's complaining about the fact that you need MFA on it now. Most people are starting to be okay with having MFA even for their email. It's not everyone, but still. I mean, this is, I'm sorry, admins live like this nowadays. Threat actors have changed. The world has changed. So we really need to do it like this. There's no, I'm sorry. Hate to be breaking it to you. This won't work without the PAW concept because we have an issue here. If you think about the, okay, that's impossible to use a pointer at. So if you think about endpoints and you want to log on to an endpoint, and on that endpoint you do it correctly and not with RDP. Europeans love managing everything in RDP. I'm sorry I always reference documentation, but I've actually had to read them, which is super horrible, but still. And Microsoft Windows Server 2000 is the first one that had terminal services connections for the server, and that documentation says there are 2 terminal services connections for every server for emergency purposes only. But never meant to be a management interface. Management interface is RSAT, Remote Server Administration Tools. You install them on a client. Servers are headless, stupid things that you don't touch. That's why Jeffrey Snower always said you don't treat your servers like pets, you treat them like cattle. Okay? And it's a US company, you have to understand. Outlook.com has 4 server groups, which every one of them have about 150,000 servers. If they would manage their environment like we do here in Europe mostly, think about this. Please patch server group A next weekend. Oh, I will RDP you like this, then I'll patch you. And then I'll patch you, and then I'll patch you, and then I'll patch you. Okay? It's not gonna work. So it was never meant to be like that, but people love RDP. We nowadays call RDP is called Ransomware Deployment Protocol, which means that that's the most horrific protocol out there, okay? So you're supposed to manage that. Now you install your RSAT here, and you want to manage default domain policy. Well, you would have to run as administrator, and you would have to use your domain admin account for that, which is denied logging on locally here, which UAC requires. So it doesn't work. Many people, when they start with tiers, they're like, oh my god, this is horrible, and they start RDPing everywhere all the time. So PAW fixes this, because PAW is the instance that allows you to log on with those accounts and allows you to manage them. So we need the tiering, we need the PAW, and they work together, okay? You have to have your Active Directory at least split into a few OUs to be able to do this. I've been doing this a lot longer than Microsoft has, so they used to be called secure workstations originally. Microsoft uses a term privileged access workstation. But anyway, same thing. Just haven't updated that. Then we have 5 policies for this use. We have the 5 deny policies that you need to use. So deny access to this computer from the network, deny logon as a patch job, a service, deny logon locally, and terminal services. For this case, which is the normal workstations, you're denied of doing that with domain admins and server admins. The ideology here is you have a local workstation, you log on as a limited user. You can always encrypt your data. Ransomware is still the biggest threat out there currently. Funny. Now I'm super happy I'm sitting on big data nowadays. I used to always do these sessions and reference someone else's data. Now I have a really big SOC, which means that I have a lot of data that I'm just suddenly having access to. And one of the things is that last year, 2021, was the first year where actually vulnerabilities bypassed phishing as the first vector for attacks. So it's always been, always, for the past 5 years, it's been phishing where it all starts, with an email. Now vulnerabilities for the first time kicked in. We've also had to adapt, meaning now we only give our customers 2 days to patch anything that has a firewall port open. So patching is more critical now than it used to be. But anyway, you get an email and you click on something, it can encrypt your data. There's one way of killing ransomware, which is that we take all users' My documents and we change them to read-only. Okay? Everyone gets it that that's a little bit counterproductive, okay? So as long as you have access to your data, even with removing your admin rights, I can't block you from changing your own data. You can encrypt it if you want. But when you're not an admin on that box, you don't get access to weapons. You can't shoot with Mimikatz as much as you want. WannaCry, for example, it would encrypt your data, but it couldn't go laterally from computer to another using the SMB vulnerability if you weren't an admin. I always say it doesn't necessarily mitigate the problem, but it contains it. Now, what if you log on to the computer as a workstation admin? Then you potentially compromise your tier. If you log on as a server admin to that workstation, you potentially compromise your servers. If you log on as a domain admin to a normal workstation that is internet connected, then you lose the game. So that's the most important part here. If you don't do anything else I'm talking about, just make sure domain admins can log on to those workstations. I wrote a blog post when the Ukraine situation started, the war started. I wrote a blog post about how to keep your company safe, and I had it translated into Ukraine first, and then I wrote it in Finnish and English as well. You can find. I have a blog called blog.win-fu.com. Anyway, and it starts with the same thing. Do this first. Block those domain admins for logging onto the workstation. That's your number one thing. Then you can concentrate on miniature things, but this you have to do first. Okay. When you have done this, you have to make sure that your administrative users still have access to manage those computers. Remember, domain admins are not needed for anything when it comes to member servers or workstations. They're only needed for managing the domain. That's a very old TechEd trivia question. If anyone's visited TechEd conferences, they have this lunchtime trivia. There was a question, and the question was, true or false? In a default Active Directory, domain admins don't have any privileges assigned to them on workstations and member servers. Many people would say false. Domain admins can do whatever they want. No, that's completely true. There's not a single privilege on any Windows member server or workstation that would be assigned to the domain admins group. They get those privileges because they belong to the local administrators group. Not because they're domain admins, but because of the membership in the administrators group. Which means if I put Sami in the same group as our domain admins, there's no difference. Except from that point towards Active Directory. So you don't need domain admins anywhere else. So stop doing that, okay? Here's an example of group policy preferences. Here's an example of a good start Microsoft documentation if you want to do this later on. And I'm really sorry because I forgot to tell you when the picture was ready. Now it's ready, sorry. Anyone, quickly, now if you want. You can get the slides later on if you want to. Anyway, minimal setup. This is minimal setup. This is straight from my blog. Do this. If nothing else, do this. This will not prevent you from getting ransomware. You will get ransomware. Everyone gets ransomware. You're going to have a single computer that gets ransomware. This prevents you from getting onto the news. Because you don't get on the news by, there was a Finnish company that had a person with ransomware. That's not really newsworthy. News says, Uber was breached. Not a single computer at Uber was breached. Okay? So this prevents you from getting onto the news. Adding groups. Many people, I have been teaching this for 20 years, 22 years, and still people don't understand how restricted groups works because they think if you use restricted groups, it kicks out all the other admins. But it doesn't, because if you use it like I use here, it uses append, which means that it only adds members and not takes away members. So it works in both replace and append. always, I would hope you have lapse and credential guard to make sure you do not laterally move around the network. If you can't do that, there's the quickest patch you've ever seen. Windows 8.1 added a pseudo group. Pseudo groups are the groups in Windows that get assigned to based on how you are, not who you are. So interactive, network, local. They added a new pseudo group called local account and member of administrators group, which means now we can block local account past the hash with a single setting. We couldn't do this before because that group would be, the membership list would be endless. If the admin's name is Jake, if the admin's name is Sami, if the admins, get the point? Now we have a pseudo group. Anyone who's a local account and member of administrators group, don't let them laterally move. Okay? But that's a quick fix. Hopefully you have lapse and credential guard. But I know credential guard requires some licensing, so we can't always rely on that. And good to understand that credential guard only applies to domain accounts. Credential guard has absolutely nothing to protect local account past the hash. Same thing for Azure, but only 2 tiers at a minimum. So oops, it's missing the PAW. I had an email that said, please prepare for your session. I thought I did. But apparently I did not read my own slides, because there's supposed to be a PAW here. PAW, that way and that way. Okay? Anyway, it's a little bit different world, because if you're native cloud, you should only have the tenant and you should only have the endpoint. You shouldn't have servers unless you're doing infrastructure as a service. But that's cheating, because that means that you're just using Azure as a data center like you did before. This used to be more difficult in Azure. Nowadays, it's actually easier in Azure than it is on-prem. So they added this now about half a year ago. So you can actually manage all the user rights assignment from a GUI on Intune. So that's the Azure way of doing the same thing that you just saw with the on-prem. Also, you can block the access to the administration portal. This is security by obscurity, because this means that they can't get to the Azure portal, but they can actually use PowerShell and Graph API and all that stuff. So it's just security by obscurity, but still recommended. The real thing you can manage here nowadays, also since about half a year ago, is the group memberships, because you couldn't do this before without an XML file. Microsoft is focusing on Intune, which since this week has been Intune again. Microsoft is so nice in coming up with the names, and now they said, thanks for joining Ignite. And I was reading all the news, and the biggest thing that they say about this year's Ignite was that they rebranded Intune back to Intune. The biggest thing they had to announce. It was MEM for a year, and now it's Intune again. I don't know, it's gonna be next week. So how does this PAW thing fit into this? There's the 2 different concepts here. First of all, don't let accounts that can take down your environment log onto devices with access to malware. Super simple concepts, not big technical solutions. These are behavioral things. This is what I love about security, is concepts. You can get so much better results by changing the way you behave rather than technical baselines installed that fix 480 different security settings that the attackers couldn't care less about. Okay? Not saying that you shouldn't do it, you should do it, but anyway. So this is the simplest thing to take down your attack surface by 95%. Don't let computers that can take down your environment talk to Facebook. I think it makes sense. If you can press the button to shoot down Active Directory, you should not be Facebooking at the same time. Okay? How do we do this? These PAW machines, we used to call them management workstations. They have AirSat installed. They have only a very limited amount of tools installed, which means it's a perfect candidate for allow listing, app locker, or I hate Windows Defender application control, but maybe even in some cases that. The only difference with these PAWs, if we compare to the previous ones, is that it's missing that one deny logon locally. It's the only thing that's different here in this policy. Why do we do this? Because servers were never meant to be managed with RDP. I don't have the time to explain this, but if you think about group policy, for example, group policy cannot be managed from a server. Well, you can, but not 100%, ever. It was always built to be managed from a workstation. That's why you need this anyway. I'll give you if you want to prove yourself that I'm wrong or right, go to your server, open Group Policy Management Console, and go and disable your client's web client service. Try it. Then you'll understand. People think that group policy is up to date by updating the ADMX and ADML files that we use. But group policy reads the values for the lists from the operating system below, which means that service is not on the list because that service does not exist on servers. That's why you cannot manage group policy to full extent from anything but a workstation. So you need this concept even if you're not worried about my security stuff. Okay? How do we do this? Mostly, what we do is we do it like I do, which is we install a VM on our computer, use the base computer for your daily stuff like Outlook, whatever, and then you use the VM to manage things. And then I will already answer questions that I'm getting after this, because I know this, done this for a long time. So the first question is, what? Microsoft says that you cannot run the management stuff on the VM. You have to run the management stuff on the host and the Office stuff on the VM. No, that was before VMs had secure boot and TPMs BitLocker, okay? And shielded VMs if you want. Next question is, what about keylockers? Everyone seems to be worried about this. If you have a VM and you start doing management stuff, what if the host gets a keylogger? It won't get a driver level keylogger without admin rights. So you already broke the rule. Stop logging on as an admin. Okay? Platform level 3, the military one. Everyone gets a separate computer for every tier. I think it's a brain dead idea. Everyone's just going to hate your idea and no one's going to use it. So I would say stop thinking like that. Okay? What about jump servers? I'm fine with the jump servers. I'll agree with the jump servers. I think you're paying for nothing. I think it's useless because privileged access workstations have AirSat, which has 16.7 million licenses for free, as RDP only has 2, which means you're paying for licenses on the jump server to get your people on the same server, which makes no sense. That's just useless money. But because I know everyone loves it, not everyone, but many love it, I'll allow you to do it, but you can only log on from a PAW. You can't log on to that from your Chromebook, or you cannot log on to that from your TeamViewer. You can only log on from a PAW, because we need to control that bit, which is the end of this chain, so that we can achieve this clean source principle. If you RDP into a system, that system is just as secure as your originating point. How do we do this? This is the simple one, IPsec. When I say IPsec, people forget IPsec is a protocol suite. It has protocols AH and ESP, which means that you can do it without encryption. It's not hard. Plus, you don't have to deploy it to the whole company. Just deploy it in between of the PAW and the servers. So with IPsec, we make sure that only someone who belongs to the PAW's computer group can talk RDP or WinRM, for example. Super simple. I would have to give feedback that it's not the best possible idea to have a boom mic if you have someone who's going to demo something. So I was about to demo something, but I'll show you a very simple thing because I'm out of time. So that was the wrong one. Where's the correct one? Oh, it is that. It's just full screen. Sorry, it's there. So this, where's the computer? DC1. RDP over IPsec. No, not RDP over IPsec in that sense. I'll show you what this does. So it's very simple. It only does a rule for your firewall, and the firewall says that the Only thing that's restricted is RDP, so it's not deploying IPsec everywhere, so you don't have to panic about not working with your, for example, iPads or Unix, Linux, whatever. So here you can see we have a rule that says that RDP is blocked, except if you use IPsec and you log on from a computer that's a PAW in a computer group called GPAWs, and then that will be allowed to connect, and it also has a checkbox there that says bypass deny rules. So IPsec bypass, it's known as. So IPsec is super simple to create this, no licensing needed, available since Windows 2000. I do domain isolation project for companies a lot, which don't cost a dime when it comes to licensing, but still people buy things like 8021X switches and all that stuff because they're really fancy. Here's the one with the jump server. So jump servers, same thing, except only PAWs can talk to the jump server. These can never talk to the internet. That's IPsec. One of the most important concepts of the whole thing. On a PAW, your domain admin can actually log on. He can't anywhere else, but here he can or she can. But they're not local admins, which means whenever you allow someone to potentially touch something bad, they should be blocked by the internet connection being blocked, but if they can, they can't do anything very bad, okay? Isolate malware from management. That's the most important thing. And now the last thing with this is, how do you do this from an Azure PAW? Super simple nowadays. You just need a one simple conditional access rule. Because now suddenly, about half a year ago, they started supporting device IDs. This means you just set the device ID for the PAWs, and now you can only access Azure portal from your PAW. What you can do is you can also use a proxy list to prevent those computers from connecting to anything but Azure endpoints, which means they can't go to Facebook, but they can go to the portal. All right? I'm going to be here for the rest of the day, and if anyone has any questions on this, I'm more than happy to take those after this, but I'll have to let I don't actually know who's next, or I don't know if we have lunch or whatever we have next, but anyway, contact me at sami.laiho@truesec.com. Please follow me on Twitter, and thanks everyone for joining.